All right. Okay, we'll kick it off. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nicholas Wiley. I am the environmental planner and conservation agent for the city of Attleboro. Welcome to the public meeting and listening session. This is for the pre-disaster hazard mitigation plan update and the municipal vulnerability preparedness program. With me, I have the director of planning and development, Gary Erosion, and also with me is Jim Reardon. He is our project consultant. He works for Weston and Sampson, and he has been with us every step of the way to help craft this plan. So a little background on the plans we are crafting. So the hazard mitigation plan is designed to look at our natural hazards and natural disasters that we have faced over the years here in the city and address our biggest vulnerabilities. And once we have addressed the vulnerabilities, we can look at our strengths and what we need to improve on. With that, we developed a core team with the, excuse me, Mayor Paul Heroux appointed a core team of 26 committee members. Those members are across a broad spectrum, including both members of the public and members of various city departments. I will quickly run through them. We have Bobby Arroyo, the General Foreman for the Department of Public Works. We have Gary Erosion, Roy Belcher, who still is the president of the Attleboro Land Trust. Steve Brazier is a member of the Attleboro Water Department. Wayne Cobley is a resident for the city of Attleboro. Derek Corsi is the superintendent of the Department of Public Parks and Forestry. We have Ben Cody, who is the president of the Friends of the 10 Mile River. Mark Cuddy, who is the executive vice president for FB and Shore here in Attleboro. We have Paul Denacey, who is the chairman of the planning board. Stephanie Davies, the senior planner in the Department of Planning and Development. David Donino, who is the director of emergency services at Sturdy Memorial Hospital. Keith Gonzalez, the president of the 10 Mile River Watershed Council. Tom Hayes, the superintendent for the Department of Wastewater. We have Police Chief Kyle Hegney. And also we have Kathleen Okowitz, the executive secretary for the mayor. William Johnson, the assistant superintendent of the Department of Wastewater. Scott LaChance, the fire chief. Jim McDonald, captain in the police department. Bill McDonough, the building inspector for the city of Attleboro. Madeline McNeely, the director of the Council on Aging. Greg O'Brien, the assistant superintendent of the water department. John Staskowitz, the former deputy health agent for the city of Attleboro. Mike Tyler, the superintendent of public works. Myself. And then we have Courtney Wunschel, the superintendent of the water department. And then we have Bertha Young, who is a former conservation commissioner and a current resident of the city of Attleboro. So a quick timeline to go over the hazard mitigation plan and the municipal vulnerability preparedness plan. And I didn't touch upon the MVP plan before. So HMP and municipal vulnerability preparedness plan go hand in hand together. As I said before, the hazard mitigation plan, otherwise known as HMP, addresses natural hazards and disasters, looking at the vulnerabilities and how we can address those through various mitigation actions. Municipal vulnerability preparedness plan, otherwise known as MVP, goes hand in hand with that, addressing vulnerabilities, but more in a sense of climate change. So we're looking at how climate change may impact some of our natural disasters and how it may impact our responses to those. And so through this plan, we have combined the two to address both equally, but to address climate change more so with the MVP. So this all started back in the summer of 2019, where the planning department received grants separately for the HMP and then another one for the MVP. So the first grant we received was an $18,000 grant from the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency for the development of the hazard mitigation plan update. With that, the city put up an additional $4,000 for a total of $22,000 total for the hazard mitigation plan. With the MVP plan, we received $32,000 from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs from the state of Massachusetts. So all totaled, we have $54,000 for this total project. And the city received a total of $50,000 in grant funding. So that all precipitated in summer of 2019. We formed the core committee that I just went over shortly after that. And then we started our first HMP and Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Committee meetings in August of 2019. Through there, we continued on with workshops on almost a monthly basis. The core committee worked very closely together with our consultant, Jim Reardon, and his colleagues at Weston and Sampson to go over what we had formally established in our hazard mitigation plan back in 2004. And so we used that as a building block, looked at our mitigation actions, what we had accomplished from there, and built off of that to craft our new plan for 2020 and beyond. In January of 2020, we conducted the Community Resilience Building Workshop. You can see that as a CRB workshop up in the timeline. That took members of the core committee that I just listed off, as well as many other members of the committee. It was an 8-hour-long workshop where we did SWOT analysis. We may go into that a little bit later, where we addressed our strengths, weaknesses, and then looked over the actions that we should take to either improve our strengths or mitigate the weaknesses that we have. And so tonight in our timeline, we are now at the listening session part. After this, we will be presenting the plan to the City Council. We will be requesting their consent and approval to then send this off to the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, as well as the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Once we receive comments from both of those agencies, we will then edit and revise the plan as needed. And then we will go back to the City Council to request final approval for submittal to MEMA and EEA for final approval from those agencies. And with that, I'd like to kick it over to Jim Reardon to discuss the plan further.
Thanks very much, Nick. It was a great introduction. Okay, and I'll go over a little bit about what's incorporated in the HMP MVP for Attleboro. HMP Hazard Mitigation MVP Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Plan. And so we combine these together into a single plan that's really aimed at establishing community resilience, awareness, priority actions, and implementation. Some significant benefits come out of developing a plan such as an HMP MVP. You prepare the city for natural disasters, ease disaster recovery in the event or at the time that a disaster comes. As we know, they come sooner or later. Improve community resilience when disasters hit. Access to FEMA and EEA grants. So this allows you access to certain grant programs that you would not be able to get to without an approved HMP MVP. And it also reduces flood insurance costs by about 15%. So we'll now go over some of the hazards as well as how climate change plays into them that are concerns for the city. So as you can see in the slide, we have 7 different types of hazards that we typically concern ourselves with, along with climate change. These are the hazards that are the most prevalent or the most likely to occur in the city of Attleboro when the hazards do occur. And these include things like flood hazards, wind hazards, winter storms, earthquakes, which occur rarely, but maybe occur on some occasions. Fires, extreme temperatures, drought, and as I mentioned earlier, climate change has a tendency to aggravate all of these different kinds of hazards, increasing the risk that they occur, the recurrence frequency, as well as the severity. As we know, climate change is related to greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases occur both naturally and as a result of human activity. So they're man-made, and the amount of greenhouse gas that we're seeing in the atmosphere has increased quite a bit over the last 100 years due to human activity. Greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide and methane as good examples of greenhouse gases. There are some others, but these are really the 2 most prevalent or the most significant for our management concerns. And what they tend to do is create like a blanket in our atmosphere. This blanket, while it allows light energy from the sun to penetrate, it prevents heat energy from the surface of the earth due to just life activities and as a result of heating of the earth's surface due to light energy. It prevents that heat energy from escaping the atmosphere into space. So the more greenhouse gas you have, the less of that energy can escape, and the more the atmosphere tends to heat up, and then the more you tend to get climatological activity, such as may occur as a result of natural disasters. You also tend to get more heating of the Earth's surface. So climate mitigation is the process that we use to try and adapt to these conditions that are the result of greenhouse gases and the heating of the Earth's surface. And through appropriate climate mitigation, we are able to increase a community's resilience, communities such as your city. As I mentioned, greenhouse gases come from both human activity and natural activities. For human activity, we have seen these increase quite a bit over the last 100 years. Greenhouse gas from human activity now makes up about 30% of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So that has significantly changed our climate, and will continue to do that as greenhouse gases continue to increase. Greenhouse gases largely come from residential sources. So you can see in this pie chart that about 86% of greenhouse gases, and this is referring to greenhouse gases around areas like the city of Attleboro, so it's sort of throughout New England. About 86% come from residential sources, about 11% from commercial and industrial, about 3% from municipal sources. And this was as of about 2006. So this pie chart has probably changed a little bit. Residential activity may have actually increased some. So the types of hazards that are a concern in Attleboro can be represented in terms of the risk they present, both in terms of recurrence frequency and severity. So you kind of multiply these things together, and that tells you the significance, the highest significance of hazards. So for example, flooding is something that happens on a fairly frequent basis. Its severity may be minor, or it may be serious, depending on the storm that may have created the flooding, or the kind of scenarios that may have occurred to create the flooding, such as in the event of a dam failure. So we can see in this table the various frequencies and severities of different types of natural hazards.
And I just want to point out that those, the high, the very low, the medium, and the severity is a function of that for the city of Attleboro, not in general.
That's correct.
Okay.
Extreme temperatures. So we're starting to see more extreme temperatures. And this comes across as warmer annual temperatures, and particularly warmer temperatures in the summer, as well as warmer temperatures in the winter. So if we try to project how climate change will impact our temperatures in the summer and the winter time, we're expecting to see many more days above 90 degrees in the summertime. Currently, we see around 6, maybe 10 days above 90 degrees. That's expected to increase by mid-century to about 24, and by the end of the century to about 35. So if you think of the summer as occurring over the 3 months of June, July, and August, you can expect that almost a month of that period will have days that are above 90 degrees. And it means we're much more likely to get heat waves, and that those heat waves are likely to last longer. This also affects the winter time. So days that are below 32 degrees will start to decrease. And a lot of people sort of look at this and think, well, that's actually kind of nice. I'm going to get warmer winters. Well, the problem with this is that it tends to impact our ecology. The way plants and animals hibernate, go to sleep in the wintertime changes quite a bit. And the types of plants and animals that can live in our region are affected by this. So we start to see more invasive animals, and plants as a result of these kind of increases in temperature. It's sort of like if you took the state of Massachusetts and you moved it from its current location all the way down to South Carolina, as you can see in this graphic. And that's essentially how the climate will change in terms of temperature between now and about 2070 or about the end of the century. Some impacts of rising temperature. So they increase things like increases in vector-borne disease from ticks and mosquitoes and things like that. Increased summer demand on aging energy systems. So your energy grid, which may be susceptible to power outages as a result of high temperatures in the summertime because everybody's turning on their air conditioning and demanding more energy, will be more negatively impacted as time goes on due to the increase in temperature. Increased heat-related stress on livestock and crops. So this will change growing seasons quite a bit, and the ability of livestock to move around freely within agricultural facilities. Increased drought and wildfires. Of course, vegetation will tend to dry up with greater amounts of heat, and this will make wildfires more likely. Migrating plant and animal species. As I mentioned before, we start to see more invasive species coming up the coastline and from the west as a result of increases in temperatures. Increase in harmful algal blooms, such as cyanobacteria or blue-green algae and golden algae. Increased stress on critical infrastructure, increased allergies and asthma rates, and increased heat-related illness and mortality. One example of the kind of trends we're expecting to see is an increase in mosquito growing seasons. So in the 1980s, there were about 96 days that were considered part of the mosquito growing season. By 2006, this had increased to 119. So you can imagine that this projection will continue and that we'll see many more days that are part of the mosquito growing season. Why is this important? Well, of course, mosquitoes are a nuisance. Nobody particularly likes mosquitoes, but they also carry certain diseases like West Nile virus, Triple E, malaria, et cetera. So the vector-borne diseases associated with mosquitoes are expected to increase as a result of climate change. Changes in precipitation. So we're seeing more intense, more frequent extreme rain events. On an annualized basis, we're seeing a little more precipitation than we used to 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. But what we're really seeing is a major increase in the number of what some people might call cloudbursts, or gully washers in the summertime. So those kind of rainstorms that maybe when we were a lot younger, or at least when I was a lot younger, we might have seen in the summertime, might be an inch and a half of rain, are now turning into 2, 3, sometimes even 4-inch rain events. These are pretty significant events, and they have major impacts for the way our ecosystems work. So we're expecting about an 8% increase in extreme precipitation by mid-century, and about a 13% increase in extreme precipitation by the end of the century. And this is defined as rain events that are above about 2.3 inches. These are what's referred to as 2-year storms. So they're supposed to occur about every 2 years statistically, but they actually occur more frequently than that in the last 10 or 20 years. Why is increased precipitation an issue? Well, it tends to decrease summer precipitation and increased episodic droughts. So even though we're seeing these sort of gully washer and cloudburst type events in the summertime, we're getting overall less rain, and more of that rain tends to run off. So it is absorbed less into the landscape because of the nature of the events. And this results in increased tendency to have droughts, and those droughts tend to be longer. Droughts can weaken trees and tree root systems. They can reduce local water supplies. Of course, they can cause crop damage. And intense rainfall can also cause crop damage. These types of rain events tend to increase the amount of pollutants that we see in water bodies as a result of runoff because of the nature of the storms, and they create stresses for ecosystems. Wetter springs tend to delay planting and reduce crop yield. So in the picture on the right here, you can see an example of a flooding event. Flooding events, there were about 4 flooding events that were reported in your area between 1996 and now. As a result of these events, there were no deaths or injuries, fortunately, but they caused nearly $12 million in damage, most of which occurred as a result of the March 2010 storms that I'm sure many of us remember as being quite significant. But they cause a lot of nuisance and damage and can result in, again, deaths and injuries. So we need to be thoughtful about these and how we manage them. Winter storms, so blizzards and nor'easters are, events that can be quite costly and disruptive, and they occur fairly frequently in Massachusetts communities. A good example is the blizzard of 2013, which left nearly 400,000 Massachusetts residents without power. Droughts can cause significant impacts on our ecosystem, particularly on plant systems. And, a good example of drought and the kind of effect that was had occurred between 2016 and 2017. So it straddled those years, and we had a number of months where there was significantly below average rain. The occurrence of droughts lasting 1 to 3 months could go up by as much as 75% over existing conditions by the end of the century. Again, this being a result of climate change. Erosion. Erosion is it tends to be caused by stormwater flow, and it can cause problems for both riverine systems and stormwater systems. So what can happen is that the erosion of soil particles can end up in river systems where they do not belong. It can affect the production of fish eggs. It can affect plant life and the substrate of the riparian systems, and really wreak havoc for the ecosystem. You can also get into stormwater systems, tend to block up systems, and may cause localized flooding. So increased precipitation, including winter rains, will likely have an increase in erosion, and drier soils as a result of drought conditions reduce the resistance of soil to erosion, and so can result in more erosion occurring throughout your city. Fires are much more likely to occur during hot weather and during drought conditions, so we're starting to see a rise in significant fires. Massachusetts Fire Incident Reporting System reported about 57 fires in 2017 in Attleboro, and 8 of these were listed as serious. While geologic events are not a result of climate change, they can certainly cause significant problems. Fortunately, we do not have them very often. Hurricanes, on the other hand, certainly are the result, or can be the result, of climate change. They can be impacted in terms of their severity and recurrence frequency as a result of climate change. So we're seeing an upward trend in North Atlantic hurricane activity. This can be charted from the 1970s on to now. And this increases both hurricanes and nor'easters, such as Superstorm Sandy. These events, the wind and rain associated with them can cause significant problems for downing trees and power lines as a result. This can obviously affect the ability of utility companies to be able to deliver power. This is certainly a significant problem in the wintertime. You don't want to be without energy, particularly electricity in the wintertime, particularly if you're using that to heat your house. So extreme weather can result in economic and business disruption, increased injuries and mortality, increased infrastructure repair costs, property damage, displacement of residents, reshaped river courses, and erosion of dunes, salt marshes, coastal habitats, and for that matter, riverine systems. You have a number of dams in the city of Attleboro, and several of these are either not classified or classified as low hazard. If they're not classified, that means that they are below the level of what would be considered a low classification. So they're lower in terms of their hazard classification than a low hazard dam. The hazard potential classification relates to the potential for those dams, if they fail, to cause significant problems, either downstream flooding or property damage or loss of life. So these dams we have in this table listed in roughly their order of hazard potential. The second page includes a series of other dams also in your city that have increased significance as you go down the chart. So you can see you have a number of significant hazard potential dams and then several high hazard potential dams. High hazard potential dams obviously carry a greater risk if they fail. Let's talk a little bit about the planning context for our HMP MVP in Attleboro. When we're putting these plans together, we need to consider land use. The city of Attleboro is just under 18,000 acres and just under 28 square miles in size. About 41% is considered urban, of which 33% is considered residential. You folks obviously have a densely populated area relative to other cities and towns around Massachusetts. And you have significant old infrastructure and development in the area. About 3.6% of your city is considered commercial, and about 6.1% is industrial. Infrastructure features in the town. So we consider this as part of the planning, both from the standpoint of vulnerability and the ability to provide assistance in the case of a hazard situation. So obviously this includes your safety, public safety programs, including the police department and fire department. It also includes your wastewater system, your dams, your roadways, and your water supply. We look also at demographic profile and for vulnerable populations. So you can see Attleboro is listed as having a slightly increasing population from 2010 to 2018. I added about 2,000 people, or maybe more like 1,500, as is similar with within the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts in general increased population slightly. The population age, under the age of 18 is about 22% in Attleboro, slightly more than Massachusetts. Folks over 65 years of age, a little less than Massachusetts, but this number is going up in Attleboro, currently just under 13%. Folks with educations, bachelor's degree or higher, just under a third of people in Attleboro have that level of education compared to about 42% throughout Massachusetts. And then a couple of additional points here. Median household income, pretty similar to the median income for Massachusetts in general, just a little bit higher at roughly $74,000. Persons in poverty, just a little less than Massachusetts as a whole. Attleboro's just under 9%. And Massachusetts as a whole is about 10.5%. Languages other than English is a little less than around the rest of Massachusetts. In Attleboro, it's 13%, and in Massachusetts overall around 23%. So we also consider environmental features. Obviously, you guys have a lot of nice environmental features around the city. A couple of examples here include Luther's Reservoir and the trail at the Manchester Reservoir. About 4.5% of the city is open land and about 2.5% is recreational space. So taking all this information and other bits of information together and sort of thinking through the planning, we identified a number of different priority actions that we felt would be appropriate for your HMP MVP. And we did this in the context of both the core team that we talked about earlier in this presentation, and then in the context also of the community resilience building workshop that Nick mentioned earlier that was held in January. This photograph is actually of that community resilience building workshop. And what we did during that workshop included looking at all the different sorts of hazards that might be occurring or have the potential to occur in Attleboro, all the vulnerabilities and features of Attleboro that might help in the case of a natural hazard, and in thinking through all these things together and compiling all this together, identified appropriate actions for the city. And we can combine the actions that we came up with at the Community Resilience Building Workshop and through our workshops with the core team. And the result is a series of proposed actions that include, in general, public education, communication systems, participation in the natural flood insurance program, policy-related strategies, infrastructure improvements such as dam and stormwater, as well as equipment upgrades, such as public works equipment, et cetera. Green technologies, an increase in trying to support those and build them around city properties, emergency response planning and enhanced management, and then tree and vegetation maintenance to prevent trees from downing power lines and ensuring that vegetation is maintaining its general health for the benefit of the ecosystem overall. In general, we prepared nearly 50 actions, or around 45 actions that are included in table 8.1 of the HMP MVP. This is towards the end of the narrative portion of the plan, just before you get to the appendices. So if you're looking at it online, that's where you'd find this table. And here's a synopsis of just a couple example actions from that table. So you can see pretty much how the table is laid out. So it includes mitigation actions. These are the actions that were identified. The hazard phase that they might be included in, whether they would be things that we would develop prior to natural hazard, ongoing during, maybe during or after natural hazards, or post hazard condition. We included estimated cost. We provided a cost range that it's included in the table. $1 sign, 2 or 3. $2 signs is an action that was expected to be around $50,000. $3 signs was between $50,000 or $100,000, and $1 sign was less than about 50. The responsibility for implementing the action. The text that's in bold indicates who is the lead for developing a certain action, such as the mayor or the fire department, as are listed in these 3 actions. And then those folks who, those departments and groups of people who might participate in implementing the action. Time frame, whether it's short term, long term, or whether it's something that's ongoing already. And then the overall priority, whether it might be a high, medium, or low priority. As I mentioned, there's about 45 of these actions listed in the plan, and this is just an example of a few of them. And with that, that concludes our presentation. Again, my name's Jim Reardon. I'm the Senior Project Manager at Weston and Sampson. And if for whatever reason you have a question and would like to get in touch with me, this is my email address.
So Jim, thank you very much. Thank you for a very good, thorough presentation and presentation of the action items. So at this part of the listening session and the public meeting, I'd like to open it up to the public. If you've got any kind of questions for us, we'd be happy to answer those. If there's any feedback, any insight, any observations that the public would like to share with us, please do so.
So I believe there are only us chickens.
Let's keep it open. So once again, I just want to state that the Department of Planning and Development, along with the steering committee, has prepared, along with our consultant, Weston and Sampson, a pre-disaster mitigation plan and a municipal vulnerability preparedness strategy. The purpose of tonight is one of the statutory requirements of the grant that we present or hold, I should say, a listening session, presentation of the plan for the general public to be able to offer some insight. We've held a number of work sessions from August 2019 through January. We've taken all that information, compiled it into I think, a pretty impressive plan that addresses hazard mitigation, natural disasters, climate change, so forth. And again, as one of the requirements, we're supposed to have this listening session to get public input one more time before we go to the next step, which is to present this to the municipal council and to gain their consent to forward it to MEMA and to the EOEEA for their comment and review. So again, we're just keeping this open right now for a few more minutes. Hopefully there'll be some feedback and questions.
And Gary, just to add to what you said, so for those that may not have been able to look at the plan yet, you can find the plan online in PDF format at the City of Attleboro's website. For those that don't know, the URL for the website is cityofattleboro.us. When you get to the webpage, if you go to the Planning and Development webpage, that is where you can find the current draft of the plan that we just went over. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, any revisions that you would like to see made, you can direct those to me, preferably via email. My email is conservation@cityofattleboro.us. Any comments you may have, we will take those into consideration, and we will see how we can incorporate your comments into the latest draft of the plan before it is submitted to the EEA and MEMA.
So we'll continue to stay here a few more minutes to see if anybody wants to chime in with some feedback or any questions. Thank you. Once again, this is Gary Erosion, the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Attleboro, along with Environmental Planner, Conservation Agent Nick Wiley, and our consultant, Weston and Sampson, Mr. Jim Reardon. We just made a presentation regarding the city's draft pre-disaster hazard mitigation plan and municipal vulnerability preparedness report. And as part of the statutory requirements of the grant, we're here tonight to make this public presentation, to receive your input. Depending on the input, we would amend the draft report accordingly, and we will be appearing before the municipal council on Tuesday, November 17th, for another public meeting, at which time we'll make a presentation and request feedback from the municipal council. So once again, we made the presentation. We ended about approximately 5 minutes or so ago, and we'll be here a few more minutes. We're open here till, I think we have until 8 o'clock. So we'll stay a few more minutes to see if there's anyone from the public that'd like to chime in and offer any feedback or ask any questions. Thank you.
Do you want me to pull the first slide up again, just so it's there for reference in case somebody signs on?
Sure, okay, yeah, that's a good idea.
Jim Jones, was this streaming anywhere else aside from Zoom or?
Facebook, YouTube,
Okay.
and the links are in the.
Are you able to see if there's anyone watching through those, through that media or?
There's 3 on Facebook
Okay.
and
Just give it a couple more minutes.
Okay.
They might be thinking about what we said and want to maybe form questions, so there's no hurry on our end.
Yeah, no, none here either.
the public have additional opportunity for input when it's before the city council.
Yeah, it's a public meeting, absolutely.
I would encourage them to email me prior, that way, or if they have comments now, we prefer if they can email it to us. That way we can try and address those comments and have our answers prepared for that meeting.
So it's about 7:14. We'll wait another minute or two. Again, this is the city's Director of Planning and Development, Gary Erosion, along with the city's environmental planner, conservation agent, Nick Wiley, and the city's consultant, Weston and Sampson, represented tonight here with Mr. Jim Reardon. We presented the draft pre-disaster hazard mitigation plan and municipal vulnerability preparedness report. As part of the statutory requirements of the grants that we received that help fund this project, we are required to have what's called a listening session in a public meeting. Mr. Reardon presented the draft plan, and we are now in a session where we're open to receive public comment and feedback and any questions you might have. So we're here. If you got any questions, we finished the presentation about 10 minutes or so ago. If there's anyone out there, please feel free to give us chime in and ask any questions. We're also going to be before the Attleboro Municipal Council on Tuesday, November 17th, presenting the plan again. At that time, we will request the Municipal Council to give the Department of Planning and Development and the steering committee permission and consent to submit the report to MEMA and to the EOEEA for their comment and feedback. And then we shall return back before the Municipal Council again in early December for final approval. So it's about 7:15 now. Thank you very much for everyone that's listening. Once again, if there are any questions, please feel free to participate in the public meeting session with the Municipal Council on November 17th. And the email address to the conservation agent, Mr. Nicholas Wiley. My email address, you can find those on the city's website. Mr. Wiley is conservation@cityofattleboro.us. Mine is cityplanner@cityofattleboro.us. Any questions or comments after you reread the report again or based on the presentation tonight, please don't hesitate to give us an email. You may call us, share your thoughts with us. We'll run these by the steering committee, and we could amend the plan accordingly, and we'll take it from there. So thank you very much. Good night, and hope to have you on board